Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Adam. So, yeah, look, Phil Tondl, I work for Lipman. I lead the design and innovation function for the Lipman group. So I've been doing that for about 7 years. Prior to that, I actually owned my own business, which was a design and construct business. I got a builder's license for that business. So I've spent my fair share of time on the tools. And then prior to that, I worked as an architect after training to be an architect at Sydney University. So, and I maintain that as well. I maintain an architectural registration. So wear a few different hats. I've had a crack at the industry from a few different angles.
Yeah. Fantastic. And we're looking at the new way of building today, and it brings about new sorts of challenges. So I'd like to just pick your brain on, say, if we are designing offsite construction and, timber falls under that overall banner, what are some of the new dynamics at play that are really important to get right for a project?
I think if we're talking about modern methods of construction in general and timber in particular, I think that team formation is really critical. So, building anything these days is a highly collaborative endeavour, and it takes large multidisciplinary teams for the types of projects that we do to realise those projects. So, I think team formation is a really deliberate, strategic. Well, it's a strategic moment in the life of a project. It needs to be handled with great care and, with very deliberately to make sure that you're getting the right mix of expertise and even personalities in those teams to help make these projects a success. Yeah, I also think that one thing we need in those teams is an integration skill set. And so what I think that looks like in our context is a really good awareness of all the various players that have expertise to contribute in this market outside the consulting disciplines. I'm talking about people who make things. So who are those players? What are their capabilities? How mature, how market ready is their offering? And then how do we combine those things? I think some players have got more of that integration skill set than others, but I think we're looking for that in teams to make these projects a success.
Yeah. Do you think, for, traditionally choosing your team, maybe for, everyone knows everything about, say, concrete construction, so you just race to the bottom and go to the cheapest sort of bid, but for consultants, do you sort of have to be prepared to pay a bit more for the right people? And, do you look at hiring in those sort of, in that sort of way?
Yeah, my immediate inclination is to answer yes. I think you do. I think we're casting teams, I guess, from a smaller pool. And so the expertise that I guess the most capable players have sometimes comes at a little bit of a premium. But I have to say, we often don't have that luxury. Often, in a contracting business like Lipman, a lot of our best opportunities are usually ECI. So there's some kind of alternate procurement model, but oftentimes, or more innovative procurement model, but oftentimes things are won at the tender box too. And so we are competing on price. And so that's where the hard work of that type of procurement is to find people that are both capable and competitive.
Yeah. So you mentioned casting. So continuing that analogy, who are we casting, say, at the beginning of the production?
I think there's a few disciplines that are just really key to timber projects. I think you're looking for an architect that is willing to go into the detail required to resolve and understand these buildings. Certainly, you're looking for a structural engineer that's got the competencies to design in timber, which is certainly different to designing in other materials, more specialised. It's a constant challenge to find the right combination of fire engineer and BCA consultant. Often there's a lot of responsibility that moves left and right between those disciplines, but ultimately we've got to be on the same page at the end with an agreed list of performance solutions that we're going to put into a fire engineering strategy. before we deliver the building. And so those two are really key disciplines. And then I think there's, it's not so unique to timber, but I think facade engineers are increasingly essential to resolved building delivery. And usually I think timber buildings often have another set of aspirations. People want really transparent glass often to see the timber and show it off, etc. So finding people who can realise those aspirations, but also resolve the technical requirements to keep the water out. And then sign off on it, for FP 1.4. I think they're probably your really key ones off the top of my head. But there's often a list of 25 consultants that we need to realise these projects.
I'll drill down in one of them. So you mentioned fire engineer and building surveyor. Do you find that sometimes subjective and from project to project, or have you actually got a team in place that maybe can, sort things out? Because some things might be a bit more subjective, it seems, in the fire engineering space, and you got different buildings with different levels of plasterboard and seemingly similar buildings that are fully exposed. So it's, what are your thoughts around that?
Look, we've got a pretty good sense, I guess, in our market up here in New South Wales. Or down here, depending on where you're listening from. But we've got a pretty good sense of the players in those disciplines in our market that have experience with particular types of buildings and particular performance solutions, I guess, given the design intent. So sometimes, people will want to expose a timber soffit in a structure. We've got a pretty good sense of the ones who have done that before and have been able to support it, and those that haven't, or are reluctant to. So we tend to, without naming names, we tend to use those ones, I guess, that have got a proven track record in a particular area or with a particular system. We're working with a hybrid floor system at the moment. We chose, so it's a timber concrete hybrid, and we chose timber concrete steel hybrid to be accurate. And in this particular instance, we chose a fire engineer that we knew had worked on the one previous project that has used that system.
Right. More generally, in regards to team, is there any sort of lessons learned, painful lessons you can pass on to anyone listening of some issues in this space generally, or maybe take that question a bit broader from team, if you like?
Look, the lesson learned that comes to mind is, I think that often when projects are procured, price is weighted such that it's prioritised. And I'm really fortunate to be working in a team at the moment where our client, to their credit, actually decided to pay a premium to retain incumbent consultants that were performing well, and all that historical knowledge that had been gathered and acquired in these projects before we were involved in them was retained in the project team. And I just think that has been immensely valuable. It's not always the case, but that's kind of so valuable or essential, but in this case it was. And I think too often in our industry, we step over the incumbent for a lower price and we lose the benefit of that experience. So I think that's worthy of consideration, particularly for clients who are making these decisions.
Yeah. One of the things I want to ask you about is standardisation more generally across projects. How do you approach this topic throughout the project life cycle?
Well, I'm a big fan of it, Adam. I actually, so when clients come to us and they're able to articulate an intent to standardise something, we're quick to get on board with that. We find it pretty elusive, to be honest. We're working with some government agencies at the moment which have genuine intent to standardise the products that they're engaging us to deliver, but they, I think the product and the system is still kind of in its early stages of development, so it does tend to change and improve and refine a little bit each time we look at one of these projects. So it's not yet standard. So I think standardisation is something that actually takes quite a long time, and it needs several iterations of continuous improvement to get to something that then is standardised. It might be classrooms. That's a current example for us. So We're big fans of it. I think you just got to work from the generals to specifics. So where we are seeing some good standardisation and consistency is around the structural grid now, and that's really helpful for timber buildings in particular. To start to get that consistency all the way back at master plan stage, because, you know, I guess with knowledge of kind of various products in the market, we start to be able to size structures and members pretty quickly, and that gives us a fairly good indication of what the likely connection types are going to be, which enables us to start to mass up buildings and systems fairly accurately, fairly quickly. So I think it's a noble aspiration. I think it's got a long way to go in a small market like New South Wales, but I think it unlocks a bunch of potential efficiency for more manufactured buildings, which timber is ideally suited to. But it takes a big program of works to get there. I mean, you know, to look at standardising, you need a large portfolio and a large pipeline for that to be feasible.
And is that what, I guess, the school infrastructure in New South Wales, which I believe you've on some of those projects, I mean, you know, taking that big leadership step, which it seems from the public sector, I mean, does that help push things along and move the industry forward in this sense, and at least get us a bit better on that topic?
Yeah, I think it is helping. I think it's a really meaningful example to other government agencies and other clients with large portfolios of, I guess, some of the benefits that it could help to unlock. So I think we really commend that work that the schools infrastructure team has done, and we're excited to see kind of what further standardisation beyond structural grids and the like can be achieved.
I was just gonna say, because like I won't name names, but I remember being part of a project and was trying to get the social housing, so trying to get the most cost efficient for the benefits of sustainability. And then I looked at the architectural plans, and it was just, you know, there seemed to be a bit of a disconnect about those goals of a timber building with cost effectiveness, and then, you know, the curved facades and transfers up the building and all that. And it seemed to be very late down the path. So, you know, I don't know what your thoughts are about just general knowledge of what the starting point needs to be, and, you know, what actually standardization means pragmatically. So, you know, from your perspective, can you just drill down a bit further on like what does actually standardization do, and how does it achieve more cost-effective outcomes?
So standardization brings consistency into the product that we're delivering, and it drives more cost-effective outcomes by allowing teams to move from a project mentality to a product mentality. So as we move to a product mentality, we're thinking less as builders or designers, and we're thinking more as manufacturers. And so we're looking for continuous improvement and efficiency. You know, many have made analogies to automotive manufacture. I think that's helpful to a point. So more like a car maker would. What they've got is enormous repetition once they set a model up for production. And standardization, when it's mature, allows us to do that. So I think that's the simple answer to your question.
That makes sense. Absolutely, Phil.
Project to product.
Yeah, productization. I like it. What about we're speaking about the team and standardization. What about documentation? How is it different in the modern, you know, with modern methods of construction, and how is it different?
Well, I think, I guess a key difference from more traditional construction methods is that ultimately the documents that are produced, or at least the models that sit behind them, they drive machines. And so there's a level of precision and accuracy. There's an understanding of tolerancing that needs to be brought to bear in our documentation and our modelling of these buildings. And that is a new and a learned skill for most people who are designing buildings in our experience. And yeah, they need to be pretty heavily workshopped, because there's just so many interfaces that need to be resolved and coordinated into those models. So I think certainly the teams I'm working with, that's a new experience for most players there. You know, the detail that we have to capture into the model is enormous, and therefore that front end effort has to be, it takes much longer, and it has to be resourced differently. It takes heaps more effort, heaps more hours to build it in the model first, where the cost of change is low. And then we build it in reality really quickly, where the cost of change is high, but we don't have any change because we've already planned it down to the screw.
Who do you think's best off captaining this process? I mean, some projects you might have multiple suppliers with their own shop drawing process, and then, but you know, then they might come on a bit later in the piece. So it's a few moving parts there. Who's the best way to captain it from the start, and how's it, you know, the best way to get it to LOD 400 and beyond?
Wow, I think it's a capable contractor with a capable team, because my experience is that it's very difficult for design teams to make binding decisions about procurement and commitments about price. My experience in the Australian market is that the builder tends to be the one that makes those commitments. So, so that's why I work for a builder, I guess. I think I think they are best placed. That's a little bit difficult for me to say for somebody who's trained as an architect, and I guess given my background, but what I see in industry now in New South Wales is that I think the builder is best placed to captain that effort. But we rely so heavily on the capability and competency of the team that we've spoken about prior to this point. I think a builder's not able to do it effectively if they're together with the wrong team.
Yeah.
And I think what we do see is there's a quite a dynamic need for others to influence the direction and input really heavily. And I can't overstate that enough. I think what we do see is manufacturers have got very real constraints that it would be arrogant to think we can vary on a whim for a project. You know, these are expensive investments that are set up to manufacture a certain way, and those constraints need to be acknowledged in the design. Therefore, they need to influence the design completion very heavily.
Interesting. So I've got a question probably loops in a few of what you're talking about there and what you're talking about more generally, and that is like, when would you say is the best time to bring in suppliers and navigating that with maintaining competitive tension, and you know, what's sort of like the best cost-effective way from a builder of managing, say, that dilemma, which seems to come up a bit as well?
I'd say, look, if we sketch out a pretty typical design program, depending on the value of the project, it probably sits at something like 12 to 16 weeks. It usually elongates a little bit. I'd say by week 3, we need to be having really serious conversations about who's manufacturing and really setting up design effort, design program, design trajectory with a clear understanding of where we want that to land.
Yeah.
Now, that's difficult if you don't have price certainty at that point, but that's what I think. 16 weeks, week 3.
Awesome. So looking forward now, what do you see as the offsite construction ecosystem more generally looking like? What is it evolving towards, and you know, technology and just general trends? Where is it all heading?
Excitingly, look, I think we're starting to see governments ask for more of it. I don't think it's going away. I think I think it's a key part of the answer about how we as a society and an industry that hasn't really innovated very much over the last couple of 100 years. It's a key part of the answer to the question of how we deliver more with less. What I mean by less is less people being recruited into the industry, perhaps levels of training that aren't what we've seen in previous decades. So I think that it's a massive part of how we become more efficient. So I think we're seeing governments realise that. I think we're seeing them start to ask for more of it. I noticed as recently as earlier this week that we now have a manufacturing commissioner in New South Wales, largely with a strategic remit, so that will be interesting. But yeah, I think COVID and a bunch of other things have really made us want to make Australia make again. I think there's a bunch of things that are looking for our increase in our sovereign capability to make stuff. So I think that manufactured buildings and components of buildings are part of that. So I think we're going to see more of this, not less.
Kind of final question for you, Phil. If I'm sort of someone just starting out my career as a grad or something, and there's, say, a moving puck, what sort of things would you recommend, say, younger people entering the industry sort of be learning to really best position themselves for where everything's going?
That's a good question. Nothing's static, right? Everything's moving, changing all the time. Businesses come and go, succeed and fail, et cetera, et cetera. Technology change happens. Certain material, kind of natural resources are unlocked, locked up. So nothing is static. So I think young graduate moving puck, I think what I'm looking for in that cohort is people just with a really genuine curiosity to go and find the information, to find the answer to the question they have, and to be willing to work to satisfy that curiosity, to make the trip, to meet the supplier, to go through the factory, to understand the manufacturing constraint, to read the research paper. You know, that hunger for knowledge that leads you to closer to a potential solution to a problem, and through trial and error you find the best one at that moment in time for that set of constraints. That's a general answer to a specific question, but I think that curiosity is not a common trait. I've probably interviewed 50 people over the last couple of years that have got an interest in this space, and I would say it's a rare an interest in working in an organisation like ours, in my functional team, and I would say that curiosity is a rare trait. To be more specific in answering your question, I am a believer in pre-manufactured value generally, and so I'd be a bit material agnostic in that belief, but I do like timber. I'm working with precast concrete at the moment. I'm working with steel prefabricators at the moment, but I think what is unique about timber is the sustainability fundamentals and credentials of that material. And so I'd also say keep a finger on the pulse of what's happening with that, because I think as organisations think about their governance and environmental and sustainable policy, you know, these things are being elevated. And so timber's got some really unique attributes that other materials don't have. Other materials have lots of relevance to our industry, of course, but timber's got some unique benefits. So be curious, keep a finger on the pulse of timber.
Awesome. Love it. That's great advice. Well, it's been phenomenal being able to speak to you today, Phil. If people want to find out more about yourself or Lipman, where should they be going to learn a bit more about what we're speaking about?
Oh, look, I've got if you want to find out more about me, I'm on LinkedIn. My profile is probably due for an update, but you can find some general stuff there, and check out Lipman online. There's a fair bit on our website. You can reach out to me directly, drop me a line through LinkedIn, mention you've seen the podcast, and I'll jump on it and respond.